Welcome to The Sleepy Christian, where we explore the peaceful presence of God in the middle of life's wildest storms. Tonight we journey into the heart of one of the Bible's most powerful stories, Daniel in the lion's den. But instead of focusing on roaring danger or dramatic escape, we'll ask a gentler question. How did Daniel sleep peacefully when surrounded by lions? What kind of faith gives a person such deep rest, even in the darkest night? As we begin, take a deep breath, settle in, and let your spirit be still. And if you're joining us from somewhere special in the world, we'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? Share in the comments below. Now let's drift gently into this timeless story of faith, trust, and divine peace. In the ancient world of Babylon, power shifted like sand in the wind. The kingdom was vast, filled with towering statues, golden palaces, and 1,000 languages echoing in its streets. But beneath the surface of all this grandeur was something familiar to every human heart: fear. Daniel, a Jewish exile who had been taken from his homeland as a young man, now found himself at the center of this complex empire. Years had passed. He had served faithfully under multiple kings. His wisdom, integrity, and unwavering spirit made him stand out among the governors and rulers of the land. But as often happens, when light shines too brightly, shadows begin to stir. The other officials, filled with envy and pride, watched Daniel rise in favor with King Darius. And they were afraid, not of Daniel's power, but of the purity he represented. He was incorruptible. And that made him dangerous in a system built on manipulation and greed. So they plotted, not just to bring him down, but to destroy him. Their fear of losing influence turned into a desire to trap him, to catch him in the very thing that gave him strength, his faith. In the halls of power, they whispered and schemed. They convinced the king to sign a law forbidding prayer to any god or person except the king himself. For 30 days, anyone who disobeyed would be thrown into the den of lions. It was a clever trap. They knew Daniel wouldn't stop praying. He hadn't stopped in decades. Why would he stop now? And just like that, the decree was signed. The seal of the king pressed into wax, unchangeable, final. Suddenly, the world around Daniel grew darker. Fear swept through the city. People whispered about the new law. They feared the consequences. They feared the lions. And perhaps, most of all, they feared what would happen to Daniel, the one man who would not bend. But here is the mystery. While the world around him trembled, Daniel did not. He didn't organize a protest. He didn't hide. He didn't even pray in secret. He went to his room, opened his windows facing Jerusalem, and prayed, just as he had always done, 3 times a day, with peace in his heart, with reverence on his lips, with the same calm steadiness that had guided him through a lifetime of trials. Imagine the contrast. Outside his window, the streets pulsed with anxiety. Inside the palace, the king wrestled with his own guilt and confusion. In the courts, Daniel's enemies sharpened their words like daggers. But in that upper room, a single man knelt in quiet communion with God. No trembling, no worry, only trust. This is what makes Daniel's story so profound. He wasn't fearless because the danger wasn't real. The lions were real. The threat of death was real. The betrayal was real. But Daniel had learned something deeper. The presence of fear doesn't mean the absence of faith. In fact, sometimes it's only when we're surrounded by fear that our faith truly awakens. Long before the lion's den, Daniel had learned to dwell in the presence of the Most High. He had faced tests before. The fiery furnace of his friends, the strange dreams of kings, the weight of exile. And through every season, God had been faithful. So when the world turned against him again, Daniel didn't need a new strategy. He didn't need a dramatic rescue plan. He simply continued doing what he had always done, trusting, praying, and resting in the arms of his God. And maybe that's a lesson for us too. Sometimes the world around us grows loud with fear, news, conflict, uncertainty, betrayal. The lions may not have fur and claws, but they still prowl in many forms: anxiety, stress, loneliness, rejection. And when they do, it's easy to believe we're alone. But Daniel reminds us we are not. Even in the middle of a hostile empire, even when laws are written against us, even when others are trying to tear us down, God is still present. And when you know that, truly know it, not just in your mind, but deep in your soul, then peace becomes possible. Not the peace of comfort or convenience, but the peace that passes all understanding, the peace that prepares you for the lion's den and even lets you sleep there. So as we continue this story, let this thought settle gently in your heart. The world around you may be full of fear, but the spirit within you is full of peace, and that is more than enough. Long before Daniel ever faced the lion's den, he built a quiet, invisible foundation, stone by stone, prayer by prayer, day by day. It was not built in public, not in the courts of kings or on the battlefield, but in the quiet moments of devotion when no one was watching. His life was anchored in prayer, and this made all the difference. Daniel was still a young man when he was first taken into exile, ripped from his homeland, separated from his family, and placed in the heart of a pagan empire. He could have lost himself in sorrow, resentment, or even assimilation. But instead of letting Babylon change him, he chose to remain rooted in the God of Israel. The book of Daniel tells us that from the very beginning, he resolved not to defile himself. That resolution didn't come from pride or rebellion, it came from devotion. And devotion, for Daniel, always returned to prayer. Imagine the scene. A young man living among foreign customs, surrounded by idols and false gods, forced to serve a king who didn't know the God of Abraham. Yet 3 times a day, Daniel would turn his face toward Jerusalem, the city of his ancestors, the city that now lay in ruins, and pray. He prayed not because it was convenient, he prayed because it was essential. Prayer wasn't just something Daniel did when he needed help. It wasn't a spiritual emergency button. It was his daily nourishment, his source of clarity, strength, and inner peace. And over time, this habit became a sanctuary inside him, a refuge that no one could take away. Think of a tree. Above the ground, it might seem still, even fragile. But beneath the surface, its roots reach deep into the earth, drawing life and stability from sources unseen. That was Daniel. His strength wasn't in his title or position, it was in his roots. He had trained his heart to stay close to God long before the trials ever came. When the law was passed that no one could pray to any god except the king, Daniel didn't have to think twice. He didn't panic. He didn't try to hide his faith or bend the rules. He simply returned to his room, opened his windows toward the east, and continued what he had always done. But what does that mean, he had always done it? It means he had practiced prayer in the small moments, in the quiet seasons, in the peaceful years. He didn't wait until disaster struck to seek God. He had already built a rhythm of prayer into the very bones of his life. So when crisis came, he didn't need to learn how to pray. He just kept praying. This kind of consistency doesn't happen by accident. It takes discipline, intention, and desire. But most of all, it takes love. Daniel didn't pray out of obligation. He prayed because he loved the presence of God. It was where he felt at home, even in exile. And God met him there every day, in the morning, at noon, and in the evening. Think about that for a moment. In a palace filled with power and wealth, Daniel chose to withdraw into a simple room, face a ruined city, and talk to a God who seemed silent to many. And yet that silent God was more alive and powerful than all the gods of Babylon combined. Because in prayer, Daniel was not talking to the wind. He was being formed by the Spirit. There's something sacred about that kind of faith. It's not flashy, it's not loud, it doesn't seek attention, but it endures. It transforms a person from the inside out, and it prepares the soul for anything. When we think of Daniel's courage in the lion's den, we must remember that it didn't come from a sudden burst of bravery. It came from a life soaked in prayer. He didn't need to find courage that night. He had been growing it quietly for years. This is what prayer does. It forms us long before we need to be strong. It shapes our thoughts. It calms our fears. It teaches us to trust. And most of all, it reminds us that we are never alone, even in a foreign land, even under threat, even in a den of lions. Prayer makes the invisible visible. It shifts our attention from the noise of the world to the stillness of heaven. It replaces worry with worship, fear with faith, and panic with peace. And this is what Daniel knew deep in his bones. When the world changes, God remains the same. When laws are unjust, God is still righteous. When people turn against you, God still leans in. And when the night is darkest, the voice of God is still whispering, "I am with you." Daniel wasn't saved because he prayed. He was saved through the strength prayer gave him. And that strength didn't just appear in the lion's den. It had been quietly growing inside him with every prayer he had ever whispered. So maybe the question isn't, what would I do in a lion's den? Maybe the better question is, what am I doing in my ordinary days that builds faith for whatever comes next? The answer may be as simple as what Daniel chose: to pray, to trust, to return again and again to the one who never leaves. There's something deeply comforting about knowing you are seen, not by the world, not by crowds or kings, but by God himself. For Daniel, this truth was not a distant theological idea. It was a living, breathing reality that shaped how he walked through each day. In a world full of uncertainty, shifting loyalties, and hidden enemies, Daniel found strength in one simple truth: God sees me. This might sound like a small thing, but it isn't. It's everything. Daniel lived in Babylon, a kingdom obsessed with power, image, and control. People rose and fell based on appearances, favors, and political games. In such a place, it was easy to feel invisible, or worse, to feel watched only by those who wished you harm. But Daniel had eyes fixed on something higher. He wasn't just aware of the palace around him, he was aware of the presence above him. He believed in the God who sees in secret, the God who watched over Joseph in prison, who saw Hagar in the wilderness, who heard the cries of his people in Egypt. That same God now watched over him, even in exile. Daniel's faith was deeply personal. He didn't believe in a distant deity who created the world and then walked away. He believed in a God who was intimately involved in the smallest details of life. A God who not only listened to his prayers but cared about his heart. This belief gave Daniel a deep kind of rest, the kind of rest that only comes when you know your life is not unfolding by accident. It's one thing to believe in God's power. It's another to believe that God sees you, knows you, and cares about what you're going through. That's what gave Daniel his unshakable peace. He could endure betrayal, face injustice, and even stare down lions because he knew he was not alone. Every breath, every prayer, every tear was seen. Think about the trap set against him. His enemies watched him carefully. They knew his schedule, his habits, his loyalties. They used that knowledge to destroy him. They saw Daniel, but they didn't know Daniel. They saw his routine, but didn't understand his strength. What they couldn't see was the presence of God surrounding him like a fortress. They thought they were in control, manipulating events to their advantage. But God was watching, not from afar, but right in the middle of it all. And when the law was passed and Daniel continued to pray, God didn't stop seeing. When Daniel was arrested, God was there. When he was brought before the king, when he was lowered into the pit, when the stone was rolled over the entrance, God saw every step. Not one moment escaped his attention. This is what trust in God's watchful care looks like. It doesn't always mean we're spared from hardship. Daniel wasn't delivered from the threat of the lion's den. He was delivered through it. And that's an important difference. God never promised Daniel a life free from danger. What he promised was his presence, his attention, his love. And for Daniel, that was more than enough. We live in a world that often makes us feel unseen, lost in the crowd, forgotten in our pain, misunderstood in our silence. But Daniel's story is a reminder that God is not blind to what we go through. He sees the late-night fears, the quiet struggles, the moments when we choose to stay faithful even when no one else understands. He sees when we choose honesty over convenience. He sees when we continue praying even when it feels like nothing is changing. He sees the acts of kindness that no one thanks us for. He sees the courage it takes just to get out of bed some mornings. Daniel's peace in the lion's den didn't come from the absence of enemies. It came from the presence of God. He trusted that the one who sees in secret would reward him in his perfect way, in his perfect time, and that trust made him unshakable. Even when the world turned against him, Daniel kept his eyes fixed on the one who never turned away. Imagine lying on the cold, hard floor of a pit. The growls of lions echo in the darkness. You don't know how long you'll be down there. You don't know what will happen next. But you do know one thing. God sees me. Right here, right now. In this fear. In this silence. In this night. That knowing, that deep, quiet knowing, can bring peace unlike anything the world offers. When we begin to believe that God truly sees us, we stop living for the approval of others. We stop needing constant reassurance. We stop fearing what tomorrow may bring. Because even if no one else understands, even if no one else notices, God does. He sees your faith, He sees your fight, He sees your pain, He sees your praise, and He is not distant. For Daniel, this truth became his foundation. And it can become ours too. In the darkest places, in the loneliest nights, in the moments when fear creeps in, remember this: you are not forgotten. You are not alone. You are fully known, deeply loved, and constantly seen by the God who never sleeps. And if God sees you, truly sees you, then you can rest, even in a lion's den. There's a kind of strength that doesn't shout, a kind of power that doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't demand attention, it doesn't panic, and it doesn't scramble to be seen or heard. It's the strength of quiet confidence, the calm assurance that comes from knowing who you are, and more importantly, whose you are. This is the strength that Daniel carried. When the decree was signed, the one that outlawed prayer and made death the penalty for disobedience, Daniel didn't stage a protest. He didn't raise his voice in anger or accuse his enemies. He didn't even try to negotiate with the king, although he had the influence to do so. Instead, he walked back to his room, opened his windows just as he had done the day before, and prayed. There was no panic in his steps, no desperation in his voice, just peace. That kind of peace doesn't appear in a moment. It is cultivated over time. Quiet confidence is not a personality trait, it is a fruit of faith. And Daniel had spent a lifetime growing it. From the moment he arrived in Babylon as a young exile, Daniel chose a different path than those around him. He didn't rely on charm, strength, or manipulation to rise through the ranks. He relied on integrity, on obedience to God, on truth. And this became his reputation. So much so that even his enemies couldn't find any corruption in him. He was trustworthy, the scriptures say, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. That kind of character can't be faked. It's real, deep, unshakable. So when the crisis came, Daniel didn't need to react in a whirlwind of fear. He simply stayed true to what he already knew. God is in control. God sees. God rewards faithfulness. And whatever happens next, he would remain loyal to the one who had never failed him. There's a powerful contrast here, one that is easy to miss. It's the contrast between Daniel and his accusers. His enemies were loud, calculating, manipulative. They schemed behind closed doors, flattered the king, and used the law as a weapon. They were desperate to protect their power and eliminate a man who made them feel small. But Daniel, he said nothing to defend himself. He didn't explain, he didn't resist, he simply trusted. This isn't weakness, it's the deepest kind of strength. The strength to remain calm when you are misunderstood. The strength to keep doing right when it costs you. The strength to stay silent when you're being falsely accused. Because you know the truth. And more importantly, you know that God knows the truth too. Daniel understood that human power is limited. Kings rise and fall. Laws are passed and then forgotten. But the authority of God never changes. Daniel didn't put his hope in the favor of men. His hope was anchored in the eternal character of God, just, faithful, and good. That's what gave him quiet confidence. Imagine being taken from your home, forced into service in a foreign land, and surrounded by people who want to see you fail. Imagine working hard, rising to success, and then having it all threatened, not because you did something wrong, but because you refused to stop doing what was right. Most of us would panic, but Daniel didn't. He had already decided who he served. And once you've made that decision, really made it, there's a kind of peace that nothing in this world can touch. It doesn't mean you don't feel fear. Daniel was still human, but he had learned to place his fear in God's hands. And in return, God had given him something stronger, the ability to rest in truth, even when the ground beneath him shook. This quiet confidence is something we can learn too. It doesn't require perfection, it requires trust, a willingness to choose faith over fear, obedience over compromise, and stillness over striving. It means choosing not to explain yourself to everyone who misunderstands you. It means staying the course even when it cost you a promotion, a relationship, or a sense of control. It means believing that God fights for you, even when you feel defenseless. When Daniel was brought before the king and accused, he didn't beg for his life. He didn't try to prove his loyalty. He didn't cry out in despair. He simply accepted the consequences of his faith, knowing that God was his defender. The king, ironically, had no such peace. Darius was deeply distressed. He tried to save Daniel. He searched for a loophole. He couldn't sleep that night. The ruler of the greatest empire on earth had no rest, while the man condemned to die slept soundly in a pit full of lions. This is the difference between worldly power and spiritual peace. Quiet confidence is not about being emotionally detached. It's about being spiritually anchored. It's about knowing deep in your bones that your life is in God's hands, and that even if everything else falls apart, your reputation, your status, your safety, God remains faithful. Daniel didn't just survive the lion's den. He entered it with dignity, he walked into it with peace, and he came out with a testimony that shook the kingdom. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is to say nothing, to do nothing loud or dramatic, and to simply stand firm, to continue praying, to keep trusting, to rest while others run in circles, to sleep when others stay up worrying. Because when you know God has your back, you don't need to scream, you don't need to fight for your place, you don't need to chase justice or manipulate outcomes. You can be still, you can be calm, you can be confident. And that kind of confidence, quiet, steady, and rooted in God, is more powerful than roaring lions or raging enemies. It is a confidence this world cannot give, and it is a confidence this world cannot take away. The descent into the lion's den must have felt like the end. For most people, it would be. The sentence had been passed, the law was irrevocable, the stone was ready to be rolled into place. And yet something extraordinary happened, not in the courts of the king or the chambers of lawmakers, but in the silence of that dark, terrifying pit. Because Daniel did not enter the lion's den alone, it's easy to imagine what the moment looked like. The guards, perhaps with hesitation, brought Daniel to the den. The king, filled with regret, stood nearby, powerless to reverse the decree he had been tricked into signing. Lions paced in the shadows, their forms barely visible in the low light of dusk. And Daniel, aged, calm, unwavering, stood at the edge, not flinching, not pleading, not resisting. What kind of man doesn't beg for his life in such a moment? Only someone who knows that his life has never been in the hands of men. The silence must have been heavy, the kind that makes your ears ring. But in that silence, Daniel was not afraid. Why? Because he believed in a truth greater than the threat. God never abandons his faithful ones. And Daniel had lived long enough to know that God often shows up most clearly in the places where hope seems to vanish. He had read the ancient stories, the fire that didn't burn Abraham's offering, the Red Sea that split open before Moses, the manna that fell from heaven. And he had seen God's hand in his own life, time and time again. This wasn't the first test of faith Daniel had faced, but it may have been the most silent. There were no voices from heaven when he was lowered into the den, no angels visible to the crowd, no miracles in the air, just the creak of ropes, the cold touch of stone, and the looming presence of lions. But still, Daniel believed, not because he could see the outcome, but because he trusted the one who walked with him into it. This is the secret of true faith. God's presence is not always loud. It is not always dramatic, but it is always real. And in that dark, deadly place, the presence of God surrounded Daniel like a shield. Whether it was a literal angel standing before the lions or the invisible power of divine restraint, something holy happened in that pit. The lions, who could have ripped Daniel apart in moments, did not move. They didn't roar, they didn't attack. They lay down, tamed by something greater than fear. Daniel's God had entered the den before him. There is a mysterious comfort in this, because while the world tells us to avoid pain at all costs, the story of Daniel reminds us that some of the deepest revelations of God's love and power happen not in our escape from suffering, but in our journey through it. Daniel's faith didn't prevent the trial, it carried him through it. And this is what so many of us miss. We pray to be spared, we plead for God to change our circumstances, and sometimes He does. But other times like this, He does something even greater. He joins us in the place of fear and turns it into holy ground. The lion's den became a sanctuary, not because it was safe, but because God was there. Think about that. The place of your greatest fear can become the place of your greatest encounter with God, not when the danger is removed, but when you realize you're not alone in it. Daniel's calmness wasn't naivety. It wasn't the denial of danger. It was the result of divine companionship. He knew what the guards didn't know, what his enemies couldn't see, and what even the king barely dared to hope, that the God of heaven walks with his people into the darkest places. And if God walks in, anything can happen. The lions didn't disappear. The stones still sealed the entrance. The night was still long, but none of that mattered, because Daniel had learned what every soul must eventually discover. It is not the absence of pain that brings peace, but the presence of God in the midst of it. How many of us are standing on the edge of our own lion's den, facing trials, betrayals, illnesses, losses, terrified of what comes next? We tremble, not because we lack courage, but because we forget we are not alone. Daniel didn't survive the den because he was strong. He survived because God was stronger. And here is the beautiful truth that lingers through history, echoing softly into your life today. You will never enter a trial where God has not already gone before you. You will never face a moment where He is unaware. You will never walk alone into the dark. He is already there, waiting, protecting, speaking peace to your soul. This is the promise that carried Daniel, and it is the same promise that carries you. Not a promise to keep you from every den, but a promise to meet you in it. And when God meets you in the pit, that place of danger becomes a place of rest. Daniel, surrounded by the most dangerous beasts on earth, slept in peace. Not because the lions were tame, but because his heart was. He trusted the unseen. He leaned into the silence, and he rested in the arms of the one who never leaves. So when your own night comes and fear draws near, and you feel the walls closing in, remember Daniel, and more importantly, remember the one who stood beside him, the one who still walks with us now. It must have been a strange sight if anyone could have seen it clearly in the darkness. An old man, cloaked in years of wisdom and prayer, sitting or perhaps lying quietly on the cold, uneven floor of a lion's den. Around him, the outlines of great beasts, strong, ferocious, wild, moved in the shadows. Their eyes glinted in the dim light. Their muscles shifted with every breath. And yet, there was no chaos, no blood, no growl, only stillness and peace. The lions didn't move against Daniel. They didn't attack. They didn't roar or lunge. Somehow they were calm. Somehow they were restrained. Something invisible had filled the den and hushed even the most dangerous instincts of these predators. Scripture tells us exactly what happened. God sent an angel to shut the lions' mouths. An angel, sent by the same God who created the stars, split the sea and formed mankind from the dust. That same God saw one faithful man surrounded by death and responded not with thunder, but with quiet intervention. Not with a mighty army, but with one messenger. One angel was enough to keep a pride of lions silent through the night. And in that moment, something astonishing took place. Divine peace entered a place of death. This is not just a story of protection, it's a revelation of God's nature. God could have prevented Daniel from ever entering the den. He could have struck down his enemies. He could have changed the king's heart or dissolved the law before it ever took effect. But he didn't. Instead, he allowed Daniel to be lowered into the heart of danger and then met him there with power. Because sometimes, God's greatest miracles are not in the escape, but in the endurance. In the silence of the den, surrounded by animals bred for violence, Daniel found rest. Not because he knew how the night would end, but because he knew who had entered the night with him. He could sleep in the presence of death because he was also in the presence of God. There is something deeply profound about the image of lions, symbols of untamed power, lying still under the authority of heaven. Their instincts said, "Devour," but something higher said, "Be still," and they obeyed. That's what happens when heaven steps into earth's most dangerous places. Nature itself yields to the voice of God. This part of Daniel's story speaks to every one of us who has ever felt surrounded by threats we can't control, by problems that seem too big, by fears that keep us up at night. We may not face literal lions, but the feeling is the same. We find ourselves in dark places, unsure of how we got there, unsure of how we'll survive. And yet, if we look closely, we may realize something holy is happening. Because lions aren't the only ones in the room. God is there too. The angel that shut the lions' mouths didn't just stop their attack. He changed the atmosphere. What was meant to be a tomb became a temple. What was meant to end Daniel's life became a place of divine encounter. And this isn't just about protection, it's about presence, peace, a supernatural stillness that makes no earthly sense. Daniel wasn't protected because he was Daniel, he was protected because he belonged to God, and so do we. The lions didn't disappear, the den wasn't made comfortable, the floor was still cold, the walls were still stone, and the threat still loomed. But God didn't remove the danger, he overruled it. And that's what makes this moment so powerful, because it wasn't just about what God did for Daniel, it's about what he still does for us. We pray for deliverance. But sometimes, deliverance looks like peace in the middle of the storm, not escape from it. We ask God to take us out of the den, but sometimes his answer is to send his presence into the den with us, to stand beside us, to silence our enemies, to calm our souls. And in that presence, even lions go quiet. The angel didn't speak a word in the text. We're not told what he looked like, or if Daniel even saw him, but that's part of the beauty. The angel wasn't there to impress or perform. He was there to act, quietly, powerfully, faithfully, just like God so often does. In the places where we think God has gone silent, he is often doing his deepest work. Daniel likely didn't know if he would live through the night. He didn't know what the morning would bring, but he did know who he belonged to, and that was enough to sleep in peace. Because when you know that God has assigned his angels to you, when you believe that heaven itself watches over your life, fear begins to lose its grip. What can man do to me? What can beasts do to me? What can darkness do to me if God is in the room? And here's something even more beautiful. Daniel's story was never just about Daniel. It was about God's faithfulness, not just to one man, but to all who place their trust in him. It's a picture, a foreshadowing of the peace that comes through surrender. A reflection of another innocent man centuries later, who would descend into darkness, surrounded by hatred and death, and yet rise again because God was not finished. We live in a world full of lions. Some are outside us, some live within us. Fear, anxiety, regret, shame, and yet, through Christ, the mouths of those lions can be silenced. Not because we are strong, but because God has entered the den with us. The angel shut the mouths of lions. And the God who sent that angel still sends peace today. So wherever you are, whatever darkness you're sitting in, whatever fear circles your heart, know this: God is not far. He is not distant. He is not watching from above, detached and uninvolved. He is with you, And when he comes near, even lions fall silent. Even death must pause. Even your heart can rest, because his peace is stronger than anything that threatens to devour you. In the silence of the den, Daniel discovered something the world could never take away: the presence of a God who is near to the broken-hearted, mighty to save, and faithful in every storm. And that presence is still with us, right here, right now. Sleep is a strange and sacred thing. It is the most vulnerable act we commit every day, closing our eyes, letting go of our awareness, surrendering control. It's when our defenses are down, our bodies are still, and our minds drift into the unknown. And yet, for all its vulnerability, sleep is also a profound expression of trust. Trust that the world will still be turning when we wake. Trust that we will be safe while unconscious. Trust that we can rest and let go. For Daniel, sleep in the lion's den was not just a physical act, it was a spiritual declaration. It was faith in action. Surrounded by danger, betrayed by his peers, sealed in darkness, and completely at the mercy of wild beasts, Daniel did something radical. He rested, he lay down in peace, he closed his eyes, he gave his body and soul over to the stillness of night. And he did this not because he knew the outcome, but because he trusted the one who held the outcome. And there is something astonishing about that. Most people would have stayed wide awake, paralyzed with fear. They would have watched every movement, tensed every muscle, braced for attack. But Daniel had spent a lifetime training his soul to trust, and now that trust expressed itself in stillness, in rest, in sleep. Not sleeping in denial, not sleeping in escape, but sleeping in surrender. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person of faith can do is to rest when the world expects you to panic. Daniel's sleep in the lion's den wasn't weakness, it was worship. It was a way of saying, God, I trust you enough to stop striving. I trust you enough to let go. I trust you enough to be still. That's what sleep becomes for the believer, an act of surrender, a holy rebellion against anxiety, a quiet declaration that even when things are out of our hands, they are still in God's. It's important to understand that this kind of peace doesn't come from a moment, it comes from a life. Daniel didn't just suddenly discover how to rest in God. He had been practicing it his entire life. Every day, every prayer, every act of obedience had strengthened his inner stillness. He had learned the rhythm of trust. And now, in the hour of deepest trial, that rhythm carried him through the night. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks or angelic choirs, just the steady heartbeat of a soul that had found its anchor. This is what true faith looks like. Not just bold declarations, but quiet surrender. Not just public courage, but private peace. The world tells us that we must always be in control, always fixing, planning, worrying, preparing. But God invites us into something different. Rest. Holy rest. The kind of rest that says, even when I can't change the situation, I know the one who can. The kind of rest that trusts that God is working, even when we are not, especially when we are not. Daniel's sleep is a beautiful paradox. The man who had every reason to be terrified chose instead to trust. The man who had no reason to hope chose instead to rest. And in doing so, he showed us something rare and sacred, that sleep, when born from faith, is not weakness but strength. We are so used to believing that doing is what saves us. That action is the proof of faith. But sometimes, not doing is the greatest act of trust. To lie down in a place of danger, to close your eyes in a moment of crisis, to exhale instead of panic, to sleep knowing God is awake. That is the heart of faith. Because when we sleep, God doesn't. He never slumbers. He never loses track of us. He doesn't need rest. And so he watches while we sleep. He guards. He speaks peace over us in the stillness. He sends angels when we're most vulnerable. And he works while we rest. This is not laziness. This is not apathy. This is holy rest. And it's something our souls desperately need. In our own lives, the lions may look different. Anxiety, loss, betrayal, uncertainty. But the invitation remains the same. To trust enough to sleep, to believe enough to rest, to know that we don't have to fix everything, protect everything, or understand everything because we serve a God who does. So ask yourself, when was the last time you truly rested? Not just physically, but spiritually. When was the last time you lay down your burdens and said, God, I trust you to carry this tonight? When was the last time you let yourself sleep, not in escape, but in faith? Daniel shows us that sleep can be a sacred act, a place where heaven meets earth, a quiet space where trust grows deep roots. Imagine Daniel lying on that cold stone floor, lions breathing softly in the shadows, the scent of dust and fur in the air. He doesn't speak, he doesn't stir, he just rests, because he knows he is not alone, because he knows his God is near. And the same is true for you. Whatever den you're in, whatever threats surround you, however deep the darkness may seem, God is there. His presence does not leave when the lights go out. His protection is not limited by stone walls. His peace is not broken by growls in the dark. He is with you. And because he is with you, you can rest, you can breathe, you can sleep. And in that sleep, you declare a beautiful truth to the world. I am not in control, and I don't need to be, because God is, and he is good. The palace was silent, but not at peace. Somewhere deep in the marble corridors, in a bed fit for royalty, King Darius lay wide awake. The soft linens, the golden walls, the finest comforts in all of Persia, none of it could bring him rest. He tossed and turned, haunted by his own signature, the seal he had placed on the decree that condemned Daniel, his most trusted servant, to death. It's a strange irony. The most powerful man in the empire could not sleep, while the man sentenced to die rested peacefully in a pit of lions. All through the night, the king fasted. He refused food. He denied himself entertainment. Musicians were turned away, attendants dismissed. He paced the floor, wringing his hands, lost in guilt and fear. His conscience was louder than any lullaby. The thought of Daniel, alone in the darkness with savage beasts, gnawed at his soul. And yet he was helpless. He had been manipulated by his advisors, trapped by his own law, and now he could do nothing but wait for morning. Meanwhile, in the lion's den, Daniel lay still. The air was damp and heavy, the walls rough and ancient, and yet it was there, in that stone-cold darkness, that Daniel experienced something the king could not: peace. He had no bed, no guards to protect him, no walls to keep danger out. He had only his trust in God, and that trust allowed him to sleep. The contrast is powerful. The king had everything the world says should give you peace: wealth, power, authority, safety, but his heart was in turmoil. He could not rest because he knew he had done wrong. His conscience accused him. His power had failed him, and for all his status, he felt like a prisoner of his own mistake. Daniel, by contrast, had lost everything the world considers valuable: freedom, comfort, even the favor of the king. But he had his integrity, he had his prayer life, and most of all, he had the quiet assurance that the God who had been with him every step of his life had not abandoned him now. One man was in a palace, but tormented. The other was in a pit, but at peace. This contrast reveals something profound about the human soul. Peace is not found in our circumstances. It is found in our connection to God. You can have the world and be restless, or you can have nothing and be completely at ease. Because real peace, the kind that anchors you through the night, comes not from your surroundings, but from your surrender. Darius had built his kingdom on law, structure, and order, but one law, twisted and used against him, became his undoing. He realized too late that the system he relied on had become a trap, and that in his attempt to control everything, he had lost control of what mattered most. This is the anxiety of worldly power. It is always fragile. One wrong move, one bad decision, and even kings cannot sleep. But Daniel's peace was built on something eternal. It was not shaken by betrayal, by laws, or by the roars of lions. Because it wasn't rooted in control, it was rooted in trust. Trust that God sees. Trust that God knows. Trust that even if death came in the night, God's faithfulness would not fail. That kind of peace is rare, and it confounds the world. It reminds us that anxiety is often the result of misplaced trust. We try to build our security on our routines, our reputations, our relationships, or our resources. But when those things shake, as they always do, our peace crumbles with them. Daniel had learned a different way. Long before the lion's den, he had practiced the art of surrender. Every day in prayer, he laid down his burdens. Every moment in obedience, he said, "God, you are enough." And now, in the greatest test of his life, he found that his peace did not abandon him. He did not demand answers. He did not rage at God. He rested. Because peace is not the absence of danger, it is the presence of God. And perhaps that is why the story includes the detail of the king's sleeplessness, to remind us that peace is not tied to luxury, position, or privilege. If the man with everything could not rest, and the man with nothing could, then surely peace must come from somewhere else entirely. It must come from above. As the night wore on, the king's torment deepened. He could do nothing but wait and hope. But Daniel, though sealed behind a stone, was surrounded by something far stronger than royal guards or lions. He was wrapped in the faithfulness of God. By dawn, the king rushed to the den. His voice cracked with desperation. "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" And from the darkness came a calm, steady reply. "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions." Peace had prevailed, not because Daniel had fought his way out, but because he had rested his way through, because in the quiet trust of that long night, God had done what only he could do. And now the king knew it too. He had seen the difference. Power had failed him. Law had failed him. But the quiet faith of one man had revealed a deeper truth, that the peace of God surpasses all understanding. So, the next time you find yourself awake in the night, weighed down by regret, fear, or uncertainty, remember this scene. Two men, two nights, two very different kinds of rest. One in a palace with no peace, one in a pit with perfect calm. And ask yourself, where does my peace come from? Because the kind of peace that keeps a man calm in a den of lions is the kind of peace that can hold you through anything. The night must have felt endless. Time moves differently in darkness, slower, heavier, filled with quiet questions and unspoken fears. For Daniel, every breath was an act of trust. Every passing moment, surrounded by beasts that could kill with a single movement, was another moment under the hand of God. He didn't know what the morning would bring. He didn't know if the lions would stay calm, if the angel would remain, or if this would be his final resting place. But he waited, in faith, in silence. And then, slowly, the sky began to change. The deep black of night softened into grey. The cold air grew lighter. Somewhere far above, the first hint of dawn pressed its way into the world. Morning was coming. Light was returning. And with it came something else, deliverance. At that very moment, in the palace, King Darius was already awake, if he had slept at all. The Bible says he rose at the first light of dawn and hurried to the lion's den. This wasn't the slow, ceremonial movement of a ruler. It was desperation, hope fighting against fear. The king ran, his royal robes likely tangled around his legs, the sound of sandals echoing off stone walls as he rushed to the place of judgment. He had to know, he had to see, he had to hear the voice of the man he respected so deeply, the man he had sentenced to death against his own will. When he reached the den, his voice trembled with urgency. "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" And from the darkness came the sound he had been longing for, a voice steady and calm. "O King, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I done any wrong before you, O King." Just like that, the long night was over. The waiting had ended. The stone was rolled away, not just from the entrance to the den, but from the heart of fear, from the tomb of uncertainty. Daniel was alive, untouched, victorious. But this was more than just survival. This was divine vindication. Morning always comes, but when it follows a night like Daniel's, it means something more. It's not just the turning of the earth. It's the unveiling of God's faithfulness. It's the moment when what was hidden in the dark is revealed in the light. And in Daniel's case, that revelation was unmistakable. God had delivered him. He didn't escape before the den. He wasn't spared the descent. He wasn't shielded from the danger, but he was protected in it. And now, as the sun rose and warmed the world once again, that protection was made visible. It's a pattern we see again and again in Scripture. The night may be long, but morning always follows. The weeping may endure, but joy comes with the dawn. God's deliverance does not always come when we want it, but it comes when we need it most. And often it arrives just after we've come to the end of ourselves, when we've run out of strength, run out of options, and can do nothing but wait. That's what Daniel did. He waited, and when morning came, so did victory. But this victory was not just for Daniel, it was for the king too. Darius had been watching, not just the lion's den, but Daniel's life. He had seen the consistency of Daniel's faith. He had admired his integrity, his wisdom, his peace. And now, faced with undeniable proof of God's power, the king could no longer remain on the sidelines. His words after Daniel's rescue are some of the most powerful in all of Scripture. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. Think about that. A pagan king, ruler of one of the greatest empires in history, had just encountered the reality of the one true God, not through a prophet's sermon, not through a miracle of nature, but through the quiet faithfulness of one man who trusted God enough to sleep in a lion's den. Daniel's deliverance became a witness. His night of testing became someone else's turning point. His peace under pressure became a declaration of God's power to the whole world. That's what happens when morning comes. The light not only reveals what God has done, it magnifies it. It multiplies the testimony. It turns personal survival into public transformation. And this is the hope we carry with us, that whatever den we face, whatever night we endure, the story does not end in darkness. God is not finished in the middle of the night. He is still writing, still working, still waiting for just the right moment to roll the stone away and reveal his glory. Sometimes the greatest miracles come after the silence, after the fear, after the long, unending night. And when they do, we understand what we could not see before, that the same God who was with us in the dark is now leading us into the light, that the same hand that held back the lions is now lifting us up, that the same stillness that carried us through the trial is now declaring the triumph. The king had Daniel pulled from the den. Not a scratch was found on him because he had trusted in his God. Those words are worth remembering. Not a scratch, not a wound. The danger had been real. The threat had been lethal, but the protection had been complete. This is not to say that every believer escapes unscathed in this life. Sometimes we carry wounds. Sometimes the lions roar louder than we expected. But what the story of Daniel promises is that God is present in every moment and that his deliverance is never late. Morning comes, always. Sometimes in this life, sometimes in the next, but it comes. And when it does, we will look back on the night and say, even there, even then, God was with me. He did not leave me. He did not forget me. He brought me through. That is the story of Daniel, and that can be your story too, no matter how dark the night feels right now. No matter how long you've been waiting, no matter how fierce the lions seem, hold on, because morning is on its way. There is a kind of peace that doesn't make sense to the world. It is not found in luxury, success, or comfort. It does not come from predictable outcomes or perfect circumstances. It is not the kind of peace you can manufacture with positive thinking or careful planning. No, it is something much deeper, something that reaches beyond human logic, beyond what we can explain. It is the kind of peace that only God gives, and it is the kind of peace that Daniel carried within him. This peace does not begin in the moment of crisis. It begins long before. It is cultivated in the quiet places, in prayer, in surrender, in trust. It grows with every decision to remain faithful. It strengthens every time we choose to believe, even when we cannot see. And when the trial finally comes, that peace stands firm. It carries us. It surrounds us. It becomes a shield for our souls. That is why Daniel could sleep in the den while a king tossed and turned in his royal bed. That is why he could walk into the pit without flinching. That is why he could face his enemies with calm. He had a peace that passed understanding. The world could not understand it because it did not give it, and therefore it could not take it away. Daniel's peace was not based on whether the lions would attack. It was not dependent on whether he would live or die. His peace came from something eternal, the unchanging character of God. He knew that no matter what happened, God was still God. God was still faithful. God was still with him. This is the peace that surpasses understanding, and it is the same peace that filled Joseph when he was imprisoned unjustly in Egypt. The same peace that rested on Esther when she stepped into the throne room to risk her life. The same peace that held Paul and Silas as they sang hymns from a jail cell at midnight. The same peace that carried Jesus as he prayed alone in the garden before his crucifixion. It is a peace that defies fear. It is a peace that silences chaos. It is a peace that holds steady when everything else falls apart. Daniel's story doesn't promise us an easy life. It doesn't promise us a way around suffering. What it promises is something better, that God will be with us in the suffering, and that his peace will meet us there. The lions may surround us, the night may be long, the odds may be impossible, but the peace of God is not tied to any of those things. It flows from his very presence. It anchors our hearts in truth. This peace is not passive. It is not weak. It is powerful. It gives us the strength to be still when the world tells us to run. It gives us the courage to speak gently when others are shouting. It gives us the ability to endure without bitterness, to forgive without conditions, to hope without evidence. And that kind of peace leaves a mark. After Daniel was rescued from the den, King Darius made a proclamation. It wasn't just a statement about what had happened, it was a declaration of who God is. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. This testimony didn't come from a prophet or a priest. It came from a pagan king. And what moved him to such a confession? Not just the miracle, but the peace of the man who trusted God through it. This is how the world comes to see God, not only through our victories, but through our peace. When people see us enduring with grace, walking through trials with quiet strength, facing fear with calm, they begin to wonder what power lives inside us. That's what happened with Daniel. His peace pointed to something greater than himself. And that's what our peace can do too. In a world that is loud with anxiety, filled with rage, and drowning in noise, peace stands out. True, quiet, unshakable peace is rare. It shines like a light in the darkness. And that's why the peace of God is not just a gift, it is a calling. God wants to give you peace not only for your sake, but for the sake of those around you, so that your life becomes a window into his faithfulness, so that others watching you might come to believe that such peace is possible, not a peace that denies pain, not a peace that ignores reality, but a peace that says, even here, even now, God is with me, and that is enough. Daniel walked out of the den without a scratch. But more importantly, he walked out carrying a deeper witness. The world had seen the power of peace. And that peace was not something he earned or created. It was something he had received because he trusted in the God who gives freely to those who ask. And you can receive it too. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to control the outcome. You don't even have to feel brave. You just have to trust. Open your hands, open your heart. Say, God, I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I know you are with me, and that is enough. I choose peace. I choose to rest in you. And the God who shut the mouths of lions will quiet your heart.
The God who walked with Daniel through the night will walk with you.
The peace that surpassed understanding then still surpasses it now. And that peace can be yours, tonight, tomorrow, always.